Assalamu alaikum and welcome to NbA Muslims Authors Speak. You get to watch me review the books. Now I get a chance to speak with the authors so readers can get to know them better. And the author that graced me with his presence today is Habeeb Akande. Habeeb Akande is a British-born writer and historian of Nigerian descent. Hold on one second. I always do that. I'm so terrible with this. Hold on. There we go. Now, I always do that every single broadcast. People must be used to it. All right, so now let's get back to you. All right, Habeeb Akande is a British-born writer and historian of Nigerian descent. A former student of Al Azhar University in Cairo, Egypt, he is the author of 5 published nonfiction books on race, Islamic history, and erotic Muslim literature, including A Taste of Honey, which we will be talking about today. Habeeb is currently working on an upcoming book about women's sensuality from an African perspective entitled Kunyaza, The Secret of Female Pleasure, which we'll get to as well, but I want to kind of like focus on Taste of Honey. Assalamu alaikum. How you doing, brother Habeeb? Thank you so much. And I just want to warn people ahead of time, okay, to fasten their seatbelts, because this is definitely we're going to be talking about some things that people may not automatically feel comfortable about. We will be using words like sex, and even, the word penis may come in once in a while. So, just be prepared for that. Okay. Now, I got to read A Taste of Honey, and I had to reread it, and I had to reread it over again. And there's a ton of notes that I have in it, because I very much see this as a seminal work where people can benefit from it. More so if it was something that was taught in a class where you would have an instructor, you would be able to explore it along with your instructor. So hopefully that will happen one day, if it's not happening already. Okay. It was a very, very fascinating book. The first question that I have, though, is what is A Taste of Honey and who's tasting it?
Very good question. Taste of Honey, the title Taste of Honey is a double entendre, which refers to either sexual intercourse or knowledge. And because in the Arabic language, sex is kind of seen as something which is delicious and desirable, and also so is knowledge, or beneficial knowledge, that is seen as something that is one of life's great pleasures. And I also wanted to pay homage to a famous hadith, which the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was involved with a Muslim woman who complained to him about her husband being unable to satisfy her in the bedroom. And they used an expression, "Dhuqul usayla," meaning taste the honey, meaning did you taste his honey, and did he taste your honey, meaning did you consummate the marriage? So I wanted to pay homage to that particular hadith, because there's so many wisdoms and so many things that you can get in terms of understanding the importance of not only sexual relations from an Islamic perspective, but also the importance of a man being able to satisfy his female partner, which is unfortunately something which is not really spoken about. So that's what A Taste of Honey means. And who's tasting it? Hopefully the reader is tasting the beneficial knowledge, which hopefully that they will get from the book.
Now, I think that the knowledge that's here is something that a lot of it is something that I'm not accustomed to seeing in Muslim texts about faith. And interestingly enough, I was very, very surprised to find that there's a rich heritage of scholarship when it comes to sensuality and desire and its connections to one's faith. So I guess my question would be, what happened to that scholarship? Because this is not something that, before this book, it wasn't something that was prevalent, but it's actually something that was for centuries before. Where did that gap take place? And what's going on now that you've released the book?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of Islamic history, since the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the Muslims are very candid in terms of talking about sexual relations, whether it's in terms of how a man should satisfy a woman, or how a woman should satisfy a man. And this was like, there's many hadiths which talk about this, which I related in the book. And there was this sparked a movement, shall we say, amongst a number of Muslim scholars and writers who wanted to talk about sexuality, sexual desire, and things like that from an Islamic perspective. And this started in the 9th century, where there was a number of works like the Encyclopedia of Pleasure, which has recently been translated into English, up until around, I'll say, the 17th to 18th century, when this tradition kind of died out, unfortunately. One of the reasons why this tradition died out, the Muslim erotic literature tradition, was because when a number of Christian missionaries went to the Muslim lands and colonized a number of Muslim lands, they brought with them their understanding, because a number of them were Christians of the Victorian era, their understanding of what morality is in terms of gender relations, in terms of sexuality, and they imposed this upon a
Okay,
number of Muslims. Hello?
you're back. We lost you for like a
You
good,
lost me. Oh,
yeah.
wow.
So you write at Encyclopedia of Pleasure, which, by the way, where is that book?
So the Encyclopedia of Pleasure, that has been translated, it was translated in 1977 as part of Serial, I think Alapoa Publishing, and there's a copy of it in SOAS libraries in the UK, but it might also be available online. That's a book that was written in the 10th century, and there's another book called An Intelligent Man's Guide to the Art of Pleasure, or the Art of Coercion. Yeah, straight away that caught your attention, but that's another book that was translated in 1977. And I used a lot of what these writers spoke about. That's what I used as inspiration for my book, because again, there was a number of books like this which spoke about how a man should pleasure a woman, and how even a woman should pleasure a man, the nature of sexual desire, both from a male perspective and female perspective, the nature of female ejaculation, which is something which only on the last 50 years that Western science has spoke about, that yes, women can ejaculate, when a number of Muslim scholars affirmed that this was a reality long ago. The issue of multiple orgasms, oral sex, and things like that. This is something that the Muslim scholars were like the sexual commentators of their time, when they spoke about practices, whether they were within the confines of Islam, i.e. within marriage, or those practices, sexual practices that were not considered to be illicit, whether it's sexual relation between a man and a man, a woman and a woman, or even bestiality, but they spoke about everything. They wasn't afraid or ashamed of speaking about the truth. Now, coming to why or how this literature tradition came to an end, like from around 18th to 19th century, what you found was when a number of Christians and missionaries colonized much of the Muslim land, they imposed, or they came with their own understanding of morality, which a lot of the Muslims adopted. So this idea of sex being just for procreation and sex being dirty, which unfortunately even many Muslims have, we've adopted this from a number of like the Christian understanding of what sex is, because from a traditional Islamic perspective, sex is seen something which is desirable, is something which is pleasurable, both for the man and the woman. Now, unfortunately, that's not the case we have today, because in many Muslim countries, whether it's in the Muslim world or in the West, whether it's the United States or the UK, generally when we hear about sex, it's from the male's perspective. The importance of a woman pleasuring a man, not the importance of the man pleasuring a woman. And women have got sexual desires, and women have got sexual needs. And some women's libidos is far greater than the man. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. And there's some women who aren't being able to pleasure, who their husbands aren't able to pleasure them, which, unlike today's day and age, many of the Muslim scholars of the past spoke about and addressed this.
Okay, so not something that's new, it's just new to us, I guess, basically. And I just really find it a little strange that, especially as a Muslim that's in the West, that the West tends to be, at least there's this idea that the West is a little bit more sexually liberal than say in non-Western countries, which again, that right there, that's a whole nother discussion. But how is it that it's been able to influence Western Muslims? I can understand that it may have influenced Muslims outside of the context of the West. But when you think about Islam in a Western context, when you think about Western Muslims, we're fairly new, and so how is it that it's been able to influence us, especially considering that in the last century, what has happened with sexual dialogue in the West and the influx of Muslims in the West, born here from native-born backgrounds as well as from immigrant backgrounds. So how is it that it's managed to have a hold on us in the West as well?
So how's what managed to have a hold on us?
This whole aversion to talking about sex and just like not even knowing about the scholarly work that existed.
Yeah. One reason is that a number of these texts are in Arabic, and many Muslims unfortunately don't have access to these works, because many of us aren't able to read Arabic, and a number of these books haven't been translated. Now the question is, why haven't these books been translated? Because I think they're very important. Cultural hang-ups, because a lot of Muslims, especially those coming from immigrant communities, whether it's from the Indian subcontinent or parts of Africa or parts of the Arabian world, they've got this perception, like I mentioned earlier, that sex is kind of seen as something that is bad or dirty or something that you only speak about within marriage or you don't speak about at all. And there seems to be a fear amongst a lot of Muslims, particularly Muslim men, about female sexuality. The West is also having this issue as well. So it's not just a Muslim problem. It's only in, like I said, the last 50 years that a number of Western sexologists are addressing the issue of female sexuality, and Muslims are also having this issue as well, because I think it's this idea that if we kind of speak about, if we arouse a woman's sexual desire, whether it's in the form of talking about it or literature, then she might cause fitna across the lands, which is problematic. Again, this is not an Islamic understanding, but this is like the male fear of the female libido, because again, we've got this misunderstanding that a woman, if she's aroused any way, then she's going to cause fitna amongst the community, which again is problematic.
It kind of comes off as kind of like the that whole idea of, the original sin, which is very Christian centric, and who first ate the apple. So any kind of sexual dysfunction that's happening is automatically ascribed to female sexual libido.
And I think as well, I think a lot of men, and again, it's not only Muslim problem. I just want to make clear that I think it's a problem amongst Western non-Muslims as well, is that we've adopted, when we're talking about sexuality, and now we're looking from the perspective of a lot of men. So because, again, I'm generalizing, but because a lot of men might be able to easily arouse or highly aroused by the thought of thinking about sex or seeing a woman that they find attractive, they think that's the same with a woman. So because a lot of men aren't capable of having these discussions, because they might run loose or whatever, they think that might be the same that might happen with a lot of women. So that's why they don't want to open the Pandora's box, shall we say, which again is problematic, because it's like we are patronizing a lot of women, because it's like, even though they're adults, even though they might be mothers, even though they might have been married before, even if they've had relations before, they might even be virgins, we don't want to arouse their desires, because it's like we feel that they won't be able to handle it. So let's just wrap them up in cotton wool and kind of protect them, which again, I think this is a very paternalistic, patronizing view that a lot of men unfortunately are having. But again, this is not Islamic, because in the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, there was women who openly went to the Prophet Muhammad. Again, but they did this, and they were very modest in how they went about this. Asked for his hand in marriage, which again, if that happened nowadays, people would be horrified. How can you ask a man in marriage? No, these are cultural issues. It's not an Islamic issue. Or a woman asking the Prophet, and even asking Umar in another narration, where she complained to Umar that her husband was able to satisfy her in bedroom. And again, she praised him, said that her husband is a good man, he prays, he fasts, he does night prayers, but in the bedroom, he's lacking. And that's the reality, that this idea that if you're a good Muslim man, then you must be good in all aspects of your life. And that's not necessarily the case. And if you've grown up in a very in a culture which got a strict gender segregation, this can also lead to sexual dysfunction, which unfortunately does occur in both the Muslim lands and also the non-Muslim lands, but amongst a number of Muslims. These are so many issues, again, which we can talk about, but ultimately it's a case of trying to understand the issue of sensuality, sexuality without the cultural underpinnings that unfortunately a lot of us, when we view these kind of issues, because we're all products of our environment, we can't get away from that.
Well, and it also seems like, and this was like a question that I had, that there's so much that's happening in the limited Muslim dialogues about sex, in particular, in the context of marriage, and as well as just different tactics that can be verbal or even just physical, that in order to suppress the female libido. It just kind of makes you wonder, are Muslim men in general, but particularly Muslim men, because when you look at the texts that are out there, when you hear the talks that are out there, when you see what's going on between intimate partners in Muslim cultures, it just seems like there's this fear of the female libido that exists among Muslim men. Has that been your experience? Have you found that to be the case?
Yeah, most definitely. And I think, unfortunately, there are a number of...
I said you heard it all live. They are afraid.
No, they are afraid. No, it's true. It's true. And I'll admit that as a man that had these fears before, I'll be honest, but even as a man, it takes, whether it's a sense of maturity or some self-reflection, to admit that you have these insecurities or these fears about, because every man, we've got this bravado that we can satisfy a woman. And if you're not able to do it, or even a thought comes into your mind, it's like affecting your manhood. And a lot of men aren't ready to face this. And especially within the context of marriage, because this is something that the idea that you can't satisfy a woman, obviously we've got this idea we need to be able to protect our women, both financially and also physically, but also sexually. That's something that a lot of men, we hold in high regard, that we can do this. But unfortunately, a number of us aren't having conversations with women, whether it's our wives or even women in general, to understand how are we able to satisfy her? Because even our understanding of satisfying a woman is generally just, you know, you have to be, excuse my language, but strong, hard, fast, and quick. And again, that's the male understanding. For a man to be, you know, highly aroused and to enjoy himself in terms of sexual pleasure, that works. But whereas with a woman, obviously women are different, but she might require a more soft, gentle approach, and women are subtle. And also the issue of like mental foreplay, that's something which a lot of men aren't willing to engage in, because for us it doesn't stimulate us. Like to engage, to emotionally, you know, to stimulate her mind, to have sweet talks and things like that. This is something which the Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, told us that you should do. That don't go to your woman like a camel goes to quench his thirst, and then after it's done just sleeps. Or when you're going to engage with your wife, send messages beforehand. And when they asked him what is the messages that you send beforehand, he said sweet kisses and kind words. Now again, this is about understanding the foreplay and how foreplay is so important before you actually go into penetration. But again, with a lot of men, we're going to go straight into penetration. Now coming to how the different tactics that men used in history, unfortunately, even Muslim men, to suppress female libido. One, which I'm sure many of us know about, is female genital mutilation. And unfortunately, what you found, because I lived in Egypt for 3.5 years, and you found this it's quite prevalent, unfortunately, in Egypt. And some Muslim men, even religious, learned Muslims, would use female circumcision, because there's some hadiths which mentions female circumcision, which is similar to, you can say, to the practice of, I think it's called clito, get the pronunciation. Yes, thank you very much. In the Western world, and they use this to justify female genital mutilation, or they'll try and use some logic to say that we need to, because we fear that a woman might, you know, run wild, we need to cut off her clitoris, we need to remove her clitoris, because we're safeguarding her and the community. But ultimately, this comes from.
Why is it they're not cutting off the tips of penises?
Why? Because again, it's a double. Like again, as a man, I'm not worried. I'm not worried about other men, because men aren't going to sexually assault me or rape me. But I'm worried about women, because I don't want my women to be going around sleeping around. And you even find this with like the fear of female libido, even amongst non-Muslims, even amongst, like, you could say womanizers or players, have you, like they are very, like, okay, I'm generalizing, but I'm sure you must know there are some men who, they might be philanderers, womanizers, will have you sleep around, but with their own sisters, their own wives, daughters, overprotective, like extremely protective. Now, why is this? Because even maybe because the way they are, they think that women are going to be like that, or maybe some of the women that they've been, you know, around or associated with, they think all women are like that. And rather than actually speak, if you don't want your wife or girlfriend, well, you can have a girlfriend, but anyway, your girlfriend or your daughter or sister.
No, let's keep it real. You know, most of men have girlfriends.
Let's keep it real. No, let's keep it real. If you're worried, no, let's keep it real. Let's have an honest conversation. If you're worried about your wife or girlfriend or sister or daughter being promiscuous, don't try and, you know, be very overprotective and like lock her in the cupboard or lock in the bedroom. Try and understand if she's that way inclined. Some women are that way inclined, and again, a woman is, she can do what she likes, but not a lot of women are that way inclined. But because some men are, and I recently posted something on Facebook about you know, questioning whether I believe that some men aren't built for monogamy. That some men, if given opportunity, unfortunately, they will step out on their lady. Not to justify this, but some men think that's how all women are like. So they think in order to curb this, we need to lock them up in their homes. We need to ensure they don't speak to anyone at all. We need to, you know, practice, you know, female FGM, female genital mutilation, and Islamicize this and make it out like it's good for the whole community and things like this. And these are some issues which, unfortunately, was mentioned in some of the classic Muslim texts, because even some Muslim scholars had this issue. That how can we suppress the female libido? Because if not, it's going to run wild. And there are some interpretations which some Muslim scholars made of the story of Prophet Yusuf and Al-Aziz's wife, and she was seen as, I mean, in the Islamic tradition, she's seen as like the femme fatale, kind of like seen as equivalent to Jezebel in the Christian tradition. She's seen as the archetype of how all Muslim women is: hypersexual, uncontrollable lust. So because women are like this, and this story was mentioned in the Quran, they were like, how can we prevent women from, just sleeping with our servants at the time or friends? And it's just like, we need to trap them, we need to lock them away. And again, this is not Islamic, but this is unfortunately came about from some Muslim men in particular who had an issue or who feared female libido, which again, I think we as Muslims, we need to kind of, in today's day and age, we need to address this, because this is something which goes on nowadays. But again, most of the people that control this narrative are Muslim men, and they're just going to be talking about their fears and their insecurities, which might be a woman's libido. So therefore, they're not really going to address this.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that it's very much centered on the Muslim male fear of woman's sexual autonomy and libido, because I think that the fact that you're a man and you authored this book is significant. I think that there are plenty of Muslim women scholars that could author a similar book, but they would receive a lot of backlash just because they're a woman that is addressing this issue. And I mean, and you're coming with scholarly work, so it's not like, the Girlfriend's Guide to Sex or anything like that. It's about the scholarship that has been happening for hundreds of years in Islamic culture. But I think that the fact that it's a male's name on it and not a female's name is very, very significant because of this fear of the woman's sexual libido. Now, that being said, have you received pushback for writing a work like this?
Very much so. I've received, and I knew that I would receive pushback.
They wasn't cool with it? People wasn't cool with it?
No, a lot of people not. I still get some messages now and again on my Facebook page, or people email me saying, "This is haram. What are you doing? And you're causing fitna and all the rest of it." And there was even one incident which I'm going to tell you, which is quite funny, which I put a post on for the book, and a man commented initially and said that this is haram, what you're doing, why have you got Islam in the title, take it out, you're causing fitna, blah blah blah. And then about 20 minutes later, a woman commented and said, on the same post, I really like what you're doing, mashallah, I really enjoy this post, I'm benefiting a lot from it. And then the same man posted it again like 5 minutes later, and I didn't realize that was his wife, and he was rebuking her, saying that, what, I told you not to be reading this type of information. So even within the same home, you can have some men, which again, a lot of the critics are going to have been men because of this fear of female sexuality, which I think comes down to, and again, so I mean, as in the book or the work I'm doing, who haven't taken the time to read the book, I mean, I can understand it, but I don't pay too much attention to that. People got constructive criticism. I'm more than happy to sit down and listen to what they've got to say. But one issue is all that some people have, that they see some passages. So if the book is quite explicit in some areas. I talk about some topics that can be considered very sensitive, like oral sex, multiple orgasm, and things like that, which some people are not ready for. Now, when they open a book and then they see some of these, and even some problematic passages, which hopefully will come and speak about, to deal with racism and colorism and objectifying Muslim women or objectifying women in general, some people, when they see these passages, they put down the book and think, oh, this is totally, I'm endorsing this type of these assertions, which that's not the case, because people haven't taken the time to actually read the book. But generally, I think people have read the book, even if they might disagree with some parts, I think they can see where I'm coming from, and I'm not encouraging people to just, open debauchery and licentious behavior and just go all out. But I'm explaining, I'm giving you a history of the issue of sensuality in Islamic history, and obviously from a Muslim, and I will admit it, from a Muslim man's perspective, because I've got blind spots. I'm not going to sit here and say I'm totally objective. Because obviously I was born in the UK of Nigerian descent, my cultural perspectives and views and attitudes towards women is reflected in even the research that I've done. And I think that's something that we have to admit, not to have this idea that people, even Western scholars, are objective. No one is completely objective. We've all got our cultural baggage or our prejudices. And I'll try to be objective, but I'm not going to lie and pretend that I'm doing 100% justice to this topic if a woman were to write this book. And that's why, and another reason that I wanted to put this book out there is, so even though I will get some critics, which I'm more than happy to take. I want other writers, Muslim writers, to kind of talk about these kind of topics about sexuality within a God-conscious framework from their own different perspectives. So more Muslim women writers, more Black Muslim women writers as well in particular, because the experience of being a Black Muslim woman is very different to being a Black Muslim man. We've got some similarities, but there's some differences which I can't really appreciate unless I really take the time to listen to the Muslim woman's perspective, Black Muslim woman's perspective. But at the same time, I haven't got insights that the Black Muslim woman has got. So rather than complain about it and say we need more books like this, because I spent 3.5 years in Egypt where I came across such works and I was able to translate some of it and do some research with it, I thought, okay, let this maybe be a catalyst for other similar works and research to be carried out by other Muslims.
Well, I certainly hope that'll happen.
Yeah, I think will happen. And again, if it doesn't happen in my lifetime, hopefully it will happen in, you know, the next generation or generation after. Because another thing as well is that we're studying texts that were written 600 years ago. And when you think about that, or the last great, I would say, Muslim book about sex was written about 600 years ago. When you actually think about it, that's quite sad.
Wow. Really?
The last
600 years?
600 years ago.
No one picked up a pen to write about something that's so essential to our lives and our faith?
What they did was they would just regurgitate what was said beforehand.
Okay.
That's why I say 600 years ago was the last, I would say, great original book talking about sex from a Muslim perspective or within Muslim culture. The later books that were written was very dry, was just regurgitating this person said this, not talking about, because I spoke about some issues like the issue of oral sex, multiple orgasms, female ejaculation, because that wasn't in the previous scholars' book. They mentioned it, they touched upon it, but didn't really go into too much detail on the issue of colorism, which was in Islamic scholarship, because they just said some wild things which maybe they didn't see as being racist or colorist or being problematic. But I, obviously speaking as someone living in the 21st century, someone reading some of these, what they've said about Black women and things like that is problematic. So that's why I actually wanted to highlight this. So I was adding to what they've done. So I'm basically stepping on their shoulders and hopefully adding and trying to continue that tradition. Hopefully someone will do that, or other people will do that going forward.
Well, I did find that as a Black Muslim woman, that was one of the things that I found interesting. That was another layer outside of the examination of sensuality and sexuality, sexual desire. And that is that this book definitely does demonstrate a continual language that is racist, misogynistic, and a combination of both. I mean, there's some descriptions of Black women in this book that I found extremely offensive, and more so that because it was by a respected Muslim scholar. And even today, we still get language like that. We still get language where Muslim scholars, at least here in the United States, have voiced some really racially problematic language and some misogynistic language as well. And we're not supposed to question that. So I found that a little difficult, not only to read, but also to kind of like decide how it is that I wanted to kind of grapple that. And one of the things that I decided was like, you know, they're products of their environment. And, you know, these were people, like you said, 600 plus years ago. So whatever it is that they're saying, and that you've recorded in your book, it's not the same as someone that's here in the present day that's kind of saying similarly a racially problematic language as well. Why is it that Muslim scholarship seems to have the ability to constantly reinforce or push forward some racially charged, misogynistic language, and it goes unchecked for centuries?
I think because when we're looking at Muslim scholarship or even modern day Muslim scholarship, generally it consists of, I'm talking in the Western context, it consists of people who are of Arab descent, from the Indian subcontinent, or Europe, like white Europeans, whether they're white Americans, but you know, of European descent. So for them, I'm sure many of them have read these passages and it has affected them because they're not aware of how someone, especially a Black woman reading this, what this can do to her iman. And even, I'll be honest, me as a man, me coming across and reading some of these texts, I found it distasteful and disrespectful. But I'll be honest, as a man, it didn't have the same impact I'm sure it would have compared to a black Muslim woman reading this, because I'm a man and it doesn't affect me like that way. Do you understand? I guess that. But in saying that, I do want to say that although there were a number of racist and anti-black sentiment that was in a number of these scholars' work, there was a movement by a number of Muslim scholars, and not all of them were black. Some were, Arabs that weren't black, and some were black as well from Africa, who wrote a number of works talking about the beauty of black women, not the virtue, because what you find with a number of even modern day Muslim scholars, when they're talking about blackness, they'll say, oh, even though this lady wasn't a beautiful woman, even though this black woman wasn't beautiful, she had a good heart. And it's as if the black people naturally aren't attractive, or they're not intelligent, but they're good in terms of their conduct and things like that. Whereas a lot of these scholars, they weren't talking about their piety. They will say, no, there are a number of black beautiful women, and black is beautiful, similar to the black is beautiful movement in America, the 1950s, 1960s. There were a number of scholars who wrote works talking about praising black women. Some of it was quite graphic and quite explicit, talking about different parts, and again, you might find it quite
well, there were some parts in this book too, so
yeah, but they were praising black women.
Parts description in this book as well.
But because they were counteracting a lot of the scholars who was praising white women, talking about how white women are so beautiful, and they wrote a number of works talking about how black women are so beautiful, and they enjoy the sexual pleasures of black women in comparison to white women and European women. So again, I mean, even that someone could find that's been problematic. But the reason why they were doing this is trying to not. And another thing as well, I think I'll try and make clear is that most of the people that was reading these books were men. Mm-hmm. It wasn't women. Most of the readership were men. So they are speaking to men. And unfortunately, whether we like it or not, and I'm going to be very honest, a lot of men, this is what, when they're thinking about a spouse, or they generally think about the physical qualities first and foremost. So they're trying to show when they are, you could say, objectifying black women, they're not saying that her virtuous qualities aren't important, but for a lot of men, they want to be attracted to a woman who's beautiful, physically, sexually attractive. And they talk about, no, black women from East Africa are attractive, black women from West Africa in a bedroom, they do this, they do that. Again, excuse me if I'm being a bit graphic. They're one of the things that they'll talk about is, they're very fiery in the bedroom, they like this, they like that. Now, again, for a man hearing this is appealing. I'm not saying
they reinforce the stereotype of black females' hypersexuality, is basically what you're telling me.
Well, when you see this, they were saying this before the Europeans. So when we think about racism and colorism, it's generally from the Europeans, which started in the 18th and 19th century. Mm-hmm. They were speaking about this in the 14th, 15th century. So this was an issue way even before the Europeans. So I'm not saying that. So if anything, are they reinforcing this stereotype, or the Europeans reinforcing what some of the Arabs said, because they came before them? And also, where some of these Arabs, where they got their views about black women, it was from the ancient Greeks. So even when we're talking about, which I didn't mention, this Muslim erotic literature tradition, it came about, one, they were inspired by prophetic traditions and Quranic verses speaking about sensuality from an Islam perspective. But also when they came across works like the Kama Sutra, the classic work of the Indian erotomology, they translated and wanted to write about a book about sexuality, but from an Islamic perspective. Many people, when they think about the Kama Sutra, they think it's just about sexual positions, when in reality, it's a religious textbook talking about the art of pleasure. It's about relationships. And only 20% or even less than that of the book speak about sexual positions. But today, if you ask anyone in the West, what is the Kama Sutra about? They'll say, oh, it's about sexual positions, when in reality, that's doing a disservice to the book. Some part of it is to do with sexual relations and sexual positions, but it's about what a man desires in a woman, what a woman desires in a man, things that, there's so many things, but it's ultimately dealing with the issue of sexuality and sexual desire, which the Muslim scholars wanted to talk about, but from an Islamic perspective, as opposed to the Kama Sutra, which was speaking about sexuality from a Hindu perspective. So, that's more or less what I would say in that regard.
So, there's with so much of Islamic scholarship, is focused on masculinity.
Yeah.
Like it's written by men for a male audience, and it's read by men. And even your book, which is not necessarily written exclusively for a male audience, the husband in that couple didn't want his wife to read it. It was okay for him to read it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Want his wife to read it. So with thinking about that, it seems like the paradigm very much involves centering masculinity and masculine desire when it comes to connections of sensuality and faith and desire. Is that the Islamic paradigm, or that's just the way it has evolved in Muslim culture?
I would say that's the Islamic paradigm, because we know from the famous hadith which the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, spoke about, that even in your private parts there's an act of charity, meaning an act of where you can gain rewards when you're having physical relations with your wife. So even that aspect, when you think about sexuality and sex, as long as it's done within the proper means, as in obviously through marriage, then it can be an act. It is an act of worship. So it's very different from like the Christian perspective. And even like pleasuring your wife, not only in terms of physically, but even emotionally as well. So when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said treat women well, it doesn't just it's a holistic understanding. It's not just physically, it's not just financially, it's also about emotionally as well. So being able to emotionally take care of your wife, provide for her as well. All of these things which the early Muslims understood, even though, again, like you said, it was mainly mainly a male audience writing for other men, but was trying to encourage and teach men not to think about sexuality from a man's perspective and just think about yourself. Try and pleasure your wife in many different ways, not just looking at the physical side, but also emotionally as well. And not only the reason why I'm saying this is important, because you can earn divine rewards, because ultimately at the end of the day, as Muslims, hopefully everything we're doing is for the sake of Allah. So as a man hearing this, that I like women, and are you telling me that if I am doing something which I like in terms of my desires, I'm actually getting rewarded for that? For a lot of men, that's like, wow, that's great news. Do you understand? So I think in terms of the Islamic paradigm, sensuality, faith, and worship all does intertwine with one another. But again, that's the traditional perspective. Now, unfortunately, nowadays, and again, you need to spice up a little bit, because not everyone is going to want missionary. Again, and some cultures, that's boring. And even during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, when Umar, who was from Mecca, when he married a woman from Medina, in Mecca, they like to shake up a little bit, different positions. Again, excuse me if I'm being a bit graphic, but different positions, that's what they liked. When he went to Medina and married a woman from Medina, she was like, no, we don't do this. You don't, like, he wanted to penetrate her from the back, in her vagina, though, not obviously in her anus. And she was like, no, we don't do this, because they had this belief from the Jews that it makes you go like deformed or blind or something like that. So Umar went to complain to the Prophet to ask, is this true? And he said, no, you can come to your wife in any position which you like, as long as it's not through the anus. Now, this even shows that even within Muslim communities, within the same country, there's different cultures in terms of what is seen as acceptable or not acceptable. But ultimately, there's some men who are or some women who like it a bit, you could say, freak in the bedroom. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as obviously you don't
use that word. Do not use that word, freak.
Why? What does that mean in American context? Tell me.
Freak is like, it denotes some type of abnormality.
Okay, that's okay.
Sexual preference.
I'm glad you said this. Because, and this is again one of the importance, and I tried to show this in the book, of understand of language. So in the UK, or someone in the UK, to say freaky, it just means that you like to spice it up. So instead of just doing missionary, you like different positions. That's what freaky means. You're not just boring. In the American context, like you just educated me, it might mean something totally different.
No, it means in American context. It means the exact same thing in American context, but I take particular exception to that, because the word freak denotes that it is abnormal.
Okay, I'm glad you said that. Yeah, that's true.
Whatever it is that you want to do sexually, like especially if you're a Muslim, within certain the confines, the parameters of what is allowed. If you're freak, what's freaky about that? So what's freaky about this? I just take the word freak. That's what I'm saying.
I'm glad you schooled me with that point, because it's true. Because some people might have thought I meant by freaky involve other things which maybe we shouldn't involve. But then that then leads to even understanding what is, because I use like some people, and there's nothing wrong. Some people might be just happy just to do missionary throughout the rest of their life. It doesn't mean that they're boring, does it? Some people, if they're satisfied, both the man and the woman, and that gets them both off, that's fine. Whereas some people, they might consider that to be boring. Now, even using the word, saying that's boring, that's problematic, because we're saying what is normal.
Yeah.
You understand? Again, and one thing with it's in terms of Islam, the Quran or even Hadith, it doesn't go into detail with a lot of these matters with regards to sexuality or even how to find a wife, or how a man can find a wife, or a woman can find a husband, because like that saying says, there's devil in the details. Yeah. And if you go into too much details, you're going to make things very deep for different people. Unfortunately, what you find is that when you find a lot of modern Muslims, when they speak about the issue of sexuality or relationships and how to find someone, they are generally speaking from their own perspective or their own cultural perspective, and this might be the socially acceptable way of doing it in their culture, and then they impose that, or they say this is Islamic, and that's the problem. And what I wanted to show by relating so many different stories and anecdotes and things like that is to show that it was varied. So how people had relations, how they found it was very diverse, even amongst men and even amongst women, because even as a Muslim man, when I hear, and this is from listening to Muslim women, when people talk about like the ideal, quote unquote ideal, the practicing Muslim woman, it's like one type, even when you're talking about in terms of sexual relations. Like the idea of a woman, like I mentioned earlier, going up to a man and proposing is seen as she lacks modesty. There's nothing wrong with that at all. It happened in the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, and there was eye reveals saying that was perfectly acceptable. And what was interesting as well is that Aisha, when she heard about this, she was surprised. She was thinking, what kind of woman would do this? Because maybe for her, she wouldn't need to do that because she got married off by her father. So for her, even she could understand it. And that's something which I want, hopefully, the reader to understand, is that when you're looking at what is quote unquote acceptable, that's not acceptable, there's a lot of grey areas. It's not black and white. There's things that's clearly not allowed, but generally there's a lot of things that is allowed. But unfortunately, with a lot of Muslims nowadays, we like to give maybe our view of this is how it should be done, or even in terms of beauty, because this is what I find is attractive or beautiful, and then I tell you this is what is, and then people take things as face value, especially if it's coming from someone that's considered to be a respected scholar or whatever, and then say that's Islamic, which is problematic.
I think it definitely is, because one of the things the book expressed was intrinsic link. I'm echoing for some reason. Hold on 1 second. It was this intrinsic link between faith and desire. Yeah. And so, like you mentioned earlier, how the Prophet talked about the rewards that you get from engaging in sexual, in satisfying yourself sexually within parameters of what is considered halal. So because there's this intrinsic link between your faith and between the way that you ratify yourself sexually, okay, it seems like these conversations are important, especially considering the fact that not all Muslims are, not even within the parameters of halal, are engaging and satisfying themselves the same way, let alone outside the parameters of halal. Yeah. We don't want to talk about any of that for fear that it's going to happen. It's happening. So why is it that we are so in tune to just pushing aside talking about sex when our ummah, okay, in general, is plagued with so much sexual dysfunction and just really just anxiety about sex? Why do we keep kind of like trying to cover this up instead of just like really addressing it, especially scholarship, considering the fact that there's a tradition of scholarship doing exactly that?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like stepping into the unknown for many people, because, for example, just say if you've got like a scholar who is in his mid-40s or early 50s, got married at a young age, maybe in like late teens, early 20s. And then he's talking about even the sexuality amongst Muslims, even for himself or even herself. There's a big disconnect between what's going on with a lot of Muslim people, because a lot of Muslims, it hasn't been so rosy. There's some people that are married and they find it difficult to get married, but they still have these sexual desires. What do? There's some people that haven't got married, but they're engaging in like illicit relationships. What do? Or there's some Muslims who have this understanding that, okay, I obviously I believe in Allah, I believe in the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, but I've got these urges that I want to, they say, sow your wild oats. Let me go around, do what I need to do. I'll be honest, as a man, that's how it was like growing up.
That's for men, by the way.
Yeah, I'll be honest. Let me do what I need to, or even for people that's thinking about becoming a Muslim. One of the things that, as a man, I'll be honest, one of the hardest things is the woman issue. Like, oh, so I'm not allowed to do this. It's like, that's hard as a man. for me, I'll be honest, that's hard. But then some people, they adopt this idea of, okay, I'm not going to become a Muslim or become a quote unquote practicing unless I'm able to overcome this. And that's dangerous. Because that might be your test, because even when you do get married, that still might be there for you. But you just battling with that internally, that might be a way for you to draw closer to Allah. So although, yes, there are a number of hadiths and things talk about the rewards you get for having sexual gratification, there's also rewards in terms of being able to abstain, because that's hard. And if you've got this understanding that, okay, this might be a battle that you have to go through, every day might be a battle, but that might be a way for you to draw closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But everyone's battle is different. But some people, like I said, who are maybe in a married, who are married, happily married, having wonderful sex and things like that, they might not understand the trials and tribulations that's of someone who maybe find it difficult to get married, or they might be in love with someone who maybe they can't get married to for whatever reason. Do you understand? So I think rather than say, like, the one thing I would say which is important, and I think which scholars should be, even though it's scholars, because a lot of times I think we put too much emphasis that scholars should kind of solve our problems. Some scholars might not understand what's going on, because if you spent 15, 20 years of your life studying away in the library and writing and everything is theoretical, you might not understand what's going on in the ground.
You don't thirst.
No, you understand. No, true, you understand. So even you might be happily married and all the rest of it, but you've only had relations maybe with one woman.
That's the other thing, though. See, that's another fallacy right there, and that's the reason why I part of me gets so frustrated, because I've been Muslim for 30 years, okay, and I've seen books. There has to be thousands of books on how to make wudu. Okay. I've seen an entire book just on using miswak. Okay. And they have, whenever you look at Islamic studies courses and stuff like that, sex and sexuality is almost never studied at all at the same level that it should be, considering the fact that it is something that is constantly in a state of evolution in a person's life. Sex for an individual is never a constant in their lives, especially married couples that have been married for all of these years. And it's not like you get married and it's like, okay, the sex is mind-blowing for the rest of your lives. You know, married couples encounter things change, your body changes and everything like that. And yet there's nothing even on what, instead of a book, an entire book on miswak, why isn't there an entire book on male erectile dysfunction? Okay, why aren't Muslims kind of addressing that?
I think, again, because a lot of predominantly Muslim scholarship is dominated by men, and men in general, not just Muslim men, we do not have these type of intimate and serious conversations with other men. Our only experiences generally maybe of like real relationships is with the person that we're with. Now you don't want to divert, you don't want to speak about that information to everyone. You're not the one to tell people you might have this type of issue. Do you understand? So it's something which you might know it's a problem, but you might think it's just your problem. And again, I'm generalizing. I think maybe women will speak about these issues in terms of relationships amongst themselves much more than men. So even if a woman's only had maybe one sexual partner, two sexual partners, because of the different stories and things she's heard from different women, she's got a lot of experience and knowledge. Whereas with a man, it might just be with who you've been with, because even when men, like locker room talk and things like that, when they get together, they don't go into too much detail. They might talk about, I did this, I did that, and there's a lot of bravado attached to it, but they won't talk about issues like what you said about erectile dysfunction and things like that, because even amongst their male friends, generally we won't really discuss these issues. Again, this is a modern man problem, whereas in the time of and we have to understand, because obviously polygamy was allowed and the concubinage, again, is a problematic subject, but that was allowed. So men had a number of sexual experiences with different women, and that gave them different insights. No, not all of them with money. Okay. I'm from Nigeria, right? And it's not whether they're Muslim, Christian, or atheist. It's not, because culturally it's normalized. I'm not saying it's acceptable for a man to have multiple sexual partners, married or unmarried. You compare that to maybe a man coming from the Indian subcontinent, like Bangladesh, where it's very taboo, and the only experience culturally is not allowed, and it generally doesn't happen unless maybe he's with a prostitute. Take away prostitution, his experience with women and is very segregated, is very limited. So when he's talking about women in terms of like relationships, he can only speak about maybe what he knows, which is maybe his wife, and maybe little what he's heard from his sisters or other men who are going to give a male perspective. Whereas if a man has come from, whether it's right or wrong, has had a promiscuous past, and he's actually had active conversations with different women, he knows that not all women are the same. Do you understand? But if you hear some men, they talk about all Muslim women, all women are the same, and that's clearly someone who has had very limited experience with women, whether it's intimately or otherwise. And I think that's a problem, because you can only talk about what you know. And if you haven't actively tried to understand this issue, whether on a personal level or try and research it, you won't know like about this issue. So that's why you find more Muslims will be more interested to write books about wudu and miswak as opposed to sex and sexuality, because that's an uncomfortable subject and something which many of them are not aware of, and it's uncomfortable for them, like I said, to talk about.
Okay, so what we're seeing is a reflection of the male dominance of conversations about sex in Muslim cultures. It seems like across the board. Then if that is an uncomfortable topic for men to talk about, because like you said, it may be something that, you know, that they have very limited knowledge about, because they don't talk to each other about it unless you, like you mentioned, locker room talk, which can tend to be very base and juvenile. Yeah. Why not let the Muslim women do their job and write about this as well? Because I know that there's plenty of Muslim women that could address this topic. And the only reason why they don't is because of the extreme aggressive Muslim male backlash that they anticipate. So if the men cannot do it for whatever reason, why is it that they continue to try to dominate it? Because the result is a very prevalent sexual dysfunction across the board in Muslim cultures around the world. So why not just let Muslim women take a stab at it?
Muslim women should be writing about these type of works, and I think people like yourself, and I want to call yourself out. Hopefully, you're going seriously, because I can understand the reservations why a number of Muslim women will be reluctant to, publish types, works about erotic literature, because the backlash that they are likely to receive, especially if maybe they're not married. So they might be thinking about the consequences, the ramifications, that if they were to publish such a work, people might view them as being loose or promiscuous, all the rest, and that might affect their marriage prospects. So therefore, for their own best interest, they're thinking, I don't want to go through that. So I can understand. But those women who are brave enough and courageous enough, like yourself, to talk about these issues, I would say definitely do it, and don't wait for men to give you the approval, because you don't need men's approval to write about these type of topics. So when you're saying, why don't we allow Muslim women? You don't need our permission. My question is, why don't more Muslim women write such books, since you know better about? That's it. But I understand why Muslim women who've got this knowledge are reluctant to write about these type of books. But it requires maybe one or two individuals like yourself to put these books out, to do like these type of talks, put it out there, and hopefully that will inspire other Muslim women to write about these issues from their own different perspectives. Because I can only write from my perspective, you can write from your perspective, and some other women can write from their different perspectives, and there's going to be different nuances, but we can hopefully learn from each other. And I think that's important, because something which a lot of the early Muslims of the past did is that they learned from each other. It wasn't just they were writing from their own perspective, they were quoting so many different writers who were writing about similar issues. So I think that's what we need. We need to try and recreate this tradition, but you are going to get backlash, unfortunately, because a lot of men have their insecurities.
I said, why not let the Muslim women do it? Because masculinity can be very, very toxic and extremely violent and aggressive towards women. And if you add blackness to it, just forget about it. Yeah. But so that's the reason why I use the language that I use, because even if I'm bold enough and brave enough and bad enough to write this work, I subject myself to potential physical jeopardy from Muslim men who not only think that how dare this woman write about this, but are perfectly willing to actually go after me or any other woman who physically silenced them because they dare to talk about this topic and write about it. That's the reason why I use the language that I used.
Okay, and then in that case, I think it's important for more men to stand shoulder to shoulder with women and speak about why women should be not able, but support women writing about these type of works and support them. I think that's important because it's no point me keeping quiet or men like myself keeping quiet. We as men need to admit that we have got an issue. And I'll be honest myself in terms of our attitudes towards women. And I'm not going to pretend that my attitude towards women or a lot of men's attitude towards women is positive or is always within the confines of Islam. And we abuse our privilege. And again, we have to be able to admit that. But it's very difficult because we're enjoying our privilege. The same way, we know about white people that enjoy white privilege. Many of them don't want to address it and admit it. A lot of men, we don't want to let go of the power that we've got because we like the things where they are, unfortunately. Until something happens to maybe one of our loved ones, that's when we want to start talking about this is an issue and we need to empower them and all the rest of it. When in reality, we should be able to understand and learn from that now.
Okay. Well, since that there isn't, and I'm sure that there's going to be, and I can't wait until more Muslim women decide to write about it outside of this really kind of like pop culture type of thing, because there are some like little girlfriend sex manuals out there and everything. And I don't mean to deride it. It's just that we need more substantial work that gears more towards looking at generating functional sexual relationship across the spectrum of people, of Muslim people, because we are people and we have different proclivities and aversions and everything like that. So that's what we need, and I can't wait for some Muslim women to start doing that, and then y'all can go like this at it. That would mean that the scholarship is reviving itself, and I think that's what we desperately need. But since that hasn't happened yet, I want to talk about this new book of yours, Kunyaza. Yeah. Now, the first thing I will have to say is that please explain how it is that you as a Muslim male are addressing female sexual gratification. How is that different from every other Muslim male who thinks that they know how to satisfy a woman and decides to write a book about it? What is different about your book?
Okay, hopefully what is going to be different about my book is that I'm not going to be dictating this is the only way to satisfy a woman. I'm presenting a tradition, because before I start, Kunyaza is a tradition which originated in Rwanda in East Africa, and it's a tradition which women themselves have who teach, called sengers, sexual educators, teach other women and then men about how a man should please his wife in the bedroom. This is a tradition which, again, like I said, it's been around for about maybe 150 years, or for whatever reason, a number of people, especially outside of Africa or East Africa, aren't aware of. And I want to show the contributions of Africans towards the issue of sexuality and sexology, because the same way with the book The Taste of Honey, I wanted to show the contributions of Muslims towards the issue of sexual studies and sexology. I also want to highlight and talk about the contributions of Africans. And the book is not a religious book. It's looking at issues, exploring sexuality or sexuality from particularly African woman's perspective, because the idea of like kunyaza is derived from the word kunyara, which means ejaculate, female ejaculation. And what I found very interesting about this phenomenon is that, like I mentioned earlier, is that female ejaculation was seen to have just been discovered in the last maybe 40 to 50 years, in the West. Whereas in parts of Africa and parts of the Arab world and Muslim world, people knew about female ejaculation, and it was something that if a man wasn't able to make his woman ejaculate or squirt, however you want to call it, it was seen as something like a disgrace to the man. So even though it's about pleasuring the woman, the onus is on the man to be able to pleasure her. And also it's looking at the psychology of kunyaza. It's not just a technique. It's not just if you do this, this will happen. It's about first and foremost be able to make sure a woman is psychologically prepared to obviously receive kunyaza. Now, the reason why the man is important in this is because although it's about pleasuring the woman, the man is active participant in this encounter. It's not just about, it's about the woman in order for her to be able to obviously receive this this act, but it's about the man being able to physically prepare her. So you can say that, okay, why is, if anything, the man is just as important in this act as the woman. Because if he's not able to relax her mind, if he's not able to make her feel comfortable, if he's not able to make her feel beautiful and sexy, because we know with a number of women, the reason which prevents them from even having an orgasm is because they've mental constraints. They put mental blocks up in terms of they don't think they're good, at they're beautiful and sexy and all the rest of it. So that's why it's incumbent for the man to, in order to understand this and able to remove these mental blocks from her mind, so she feels that she's desirable. Once she does this, because this is half the issue, is enable for a woman to feel that she's able to orgasm. Once he's able to do this, then in terms of the actual mechanics, it's relatively straightforward. So even though it's talking about, Kunyaza talks about the actual technique, it's more about the psychology of Kunyaza and how the appreciation that a number of Africans had, especially like East Africans, of understanding female sexuality long before the West came and, you know, said that we've discovered, you know, female ejaculation and even the G-spot. When we talk about the G-spot, which was named after Dr. Grafenberg, that was discovered in the 80s. So you're trying to say before the 1980s, no one knew what, it wasn't named the G-spot. We didn't know. No, it's true. So that's some of my frustration is that we've got I believe that a lot of black people and Muslims, we've got an inferiority complex when it comes to the West, or like white people. So if they were to say something, oh wow, this is groundbreaking, when no, issues like, you know, female ejaculation, multiple orgasms, they were spoken about years ago. So that's why I'm
just finding that out. We've been talking about that.
Yeah, we've been speaking about. So say with Taste of Honey, speaking from a Muslim perspective, Kunyaza is looking at it from a traditional African perspective, because one thing I wanted to do, especially with A Taste of Honey, and I don't know if you've noticed, a lot of people that are speaking about the Muslim or Arab tradition of sexuality, a lot of Arabs are now taking pride in saying this is an Arab thing, this is an Arab thing. So I wanted to look at, no, there's also black people and Africans who have spoken about this issue, so to talk about the contribution, the intellectual contribution that black people have had. Because one thing, unfortunately, which I think a number of black people or people in Africa, which we don't do, is we don't document some of our work, our research, our findings. So that's why I've, you know, hopefully when the book comes out, if not later this year, early next year, it's ultimately trying to highlight the contributions which Africans have made in terms of female sexuality by exploring the Kunyaza tradition, and again, understanding the psychology about it, and to show that not everything came from the West and came from the white man or the white woman.
Well, I think that's important, and I know that in A Taste of Honey, there's the entire back of the book is dedicated to exploring, engaging with your partner sexually. So there is an entire chapter on oral stimulation, for example. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, and that's what I saw it as. I definitely saw it as just very much like the tip of the iceberg, a starting point, a launching off point to say, listen, there's a whole chapter that can be written about this. You may want to explore that further. So is Kunyaza, is that kind of like an addition to the work that you've done in A Taste of Honey, where Taste of Honey is very concise when it comes to that actual aspect of sexual gratification? Do you see Kunyaza as an expansion of that, using an African tradition?
Yeah, I would say it's like a complement. It complements A Taste of Honey, because I'm trying to revive studies about sexuality within a God conscious framework. And that's basically that's another. So, and even looking at Kunyaza, even though some of the Sengas, or the female sex educators that teach Kunyaza, a number of them are Christian, a number of them are Muslim, and you are finding Muslim women teaching Kunyaza, wearing the hijab as well, going to different schools and teaching women from a young age as well. So I wanted to talk about, again, even how they view sexuality. And there's also some problematic practices as well linked to Kunyaza, called, I don't know if you've heard of labia pulling, or it's also called labia minor elongation, and that's a problematic practice which happens in parts of Africa as well, and that's linked to Kunyaza as well. So I wanted to talk about that and how some women are endorsing that. So the same way we've got female circumcision and female genital mutilation, we've got some practices which some women endorse and practice, which they believe that a woman should elongate her inner vaginal lips in order to not only pleasure the man but pleasure herself. Also, that comes with some health risks. So I kind of wanted to talk about that. In addition to Kunyaza, there's another book I wrote called Illuminating the Performance, which talks about womanizing and erotology, but to men. But that's mainly, it's not religious perspective. it's addressed to young men under the age of 30. And the reason why I wanted to talk about that, under the age of 35, shall I say, is because whether you're religious or not religious, Muslim or not Muslim, whatever, I know for a lot of men, the issue of womanizing or player or whatever you want to call it is an issue. So I wanted to talk about, so how would you address it without patronizing a young man? Now, but rather than say, even for Muslims, so the famous hadith of a man came to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and asked if the Prophet can permit fornication. He wanted to fornicate. Now, the Prophet said, a lot of people at the time, they came to him and they said, why are you saying this? How can you, have you got no shame? The Prophet immediately asked the young man to come and approach him, and he just asked him, would you like that for your sister? Immediately the man said no. Most definitely no. Would you like it for your mother? Would you like it for other female members in your family? In order for him to understand that, like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of men that might womanize, be players, what have you, but we don't want that for our women folk. So we know inherently it's wrong. And the way you address it, sometimes it's not just about, this is haram, because it doesn't work for some people. Or even just say that if you love someone, why would you cheat? Because for some men, we have no issue of, in terms of our understanding of having a wife or girlfriend, and also having a side piece or side chick, however you want to call it in America, or someone on the side. And that even Muslims, there's a lot of Muslims that do this, and even abuse polygamy in order to suit their own desires, and you halalify it, like you call it halalified womanizing. So you've got your wife, and then you've got a secret wife, especially someone who comes new into Islam. It's a phenomenon which happens in the UK. I'm not sure if it happens in America, where unfortunately that you've got Muslim women that come into Islam, that embrace Islam, and rather than the imam or the person that's trying to teach them about Islam to safeguard them and act as their wali, their guardian, they secretly marry them, don't tell their other wife, have sexual relations, and then divorce them. And then a lot of women leave, and I've seen this repeatedly. Now, again, I'm not saying that, and the problem is because technically, quote unquote, it fulfills the conditions of marriage, it's halal, and a lot of even Muslim men who are aware of this, they keep quiet. And this is something that I had an issue, because I'm not going to lie, even beforehand, this was something that crossed my mind. So whilst I was, shall we say, engaged in extracurricular activities that I knew that was haram, I thought, okay, let me halalify this. And this is something which even some religious people said, oh, why don't you just, marry this sister? And I know I'm not committed to her. It's a halal, just, enjoy her for a couple of weeks, couple of months, and then you can divorce her, khalas, it's fine. Now, if my upbringing wasn't like, that's marriage, you don't mess about with a woman like that, I would have engaged in that. And there's a lot of Muslim men that do that, and they don't see anything wrong with that. And what my issue is that other Muslim men who know about this, even within the, I'm not calling anyone out, but who are well respected in inverted commas, are engaged in this practice, no one's even calling them out, because technically it's legitimate, it's halal, because it follows the letter of the law, but it doesn't follow the spirit of the law, because people know this is haram.
I mean,
so these are,
I think that is an exploitation of that word halal, because how is it halal to emotionally abuse someone? Where is that halal? So it's like when you think about this act where it's like, well, it's halal. How is it halal? You're emotionally abusing someone. You're playing with their emotions. You're exploiting them, and you don't know the psychological and emotional damage that you're inflicting on them and the trauma. So where is it halal? If a woman was doing it, if sisters started running around doing that mess, they'd be ready to string them all up and or find a hole and stone them to death or something like that. So I
agree with you entirely. It's not. That's why I said that, because people are looking at the letter of the law when they know, when you're looking at Islam, you have to look at the spirit of the law as well as the letter of the law. You know it's not allowed, but people are, again, from a male perspective, because he's just thinking very selfishly, he's playing with the religion to suit his own desires. So that's something which, again, we need to kind of address as Muslim men and women, but I think men more so, because it's going on, but you're not checking other men, you're just keeping quiet about it.
Yeah. There's definitely a protection of male masculinity in all Islamic cultures that I've observed in my experience, where domestic violence, the exploitation of laws of polygamy, just run rampant in the culture, and Muslim men don't do anything about it. In the like you said, like, you know, you're watching out for your privilege. You're watching out for your homeboy. So a lot of times you don't say anything. So I just would like to get back to that kunyaza. And one of the things that you said about manipulating the labia,
yeah,
or sexual gratification, and in relationship with female genital cutting.
right.
Where is this? And it's probably outside of your book. And maybe I'll just pose the question and I'll wait for my fellow Muslim women that are in this field of sexual mutilation, of genital mutilation, to chime in on Facebook. There is not. Why is this running prevalence to altering the female genital organs? Did the scholarship in the past ever have to address that? And if so, did they kind of encourage it, not like kind of wishy-washy about it, or just kind of saying like, you know, this is really something you want to think about not doing?
Yeah. It's from an Islamic perspective, or when it's about kunyaza?
Both.
The first, from an Islamic perspective, you've got FGM, female genital mutilation, which the World Health Organization is classified into the 4 types. And then you've got, which some Muslims, not all, but I do mention this in the book, A Taste of Honey, female circumcision. Now, there are some Muslim scholars that say that it's not compulsory, but it's they say it's honorable. It's like it's a sunnah to circumcise.
Which makes it compulsory.
Not necessarily. I'm just going to present what some of their. I don't agree with female circumcision. I'll just say that from the back. But some of them that who endorse or encourage it, and some actually believe that it's compulsory. They say that female circumcision is not the same as female genital mutilation. That's what some of their arguments are. I know that is the Muslim understanding of female circumcision will probably come under, I think it's type 4 of World Health Organization understanding of female genital mutilation. But there's some who say that it's permissible, and then some Muslims, there are a number of Muslim scholars who say that it's not allowed. So there's a debate there, right? But I don't agree with it, first and foremost, but there's a debate. And there are some hadiths which indicate females, which talk about female genital female circumcision, sorry. But those hadiths, there's a debate with regards to with their authenticity. So it might not be actually like permitted, like in terms of the Prophet might have not actually said that. That's why there's a debate in that regard. But even if those hadiths are authentic, we know that the Prophet didn't circumcise any of his daughters. So therefore, we know it's definitely not compulsory. But there's a debate again amongst Muslim scholars in some parts of the world whether female circumcision, is permitted. And again, I mentioned that in the book, A Taste of Honey. Now, in terms of labia minora elongation, also known as labia pulling, which is practiced in parts of East and Central Africa. Now, again, there's scholarship from Africans, both scholars in Africa and also scholars from the West talking about this. Now, what's interesting, when you're looking at female labia pulling, it's not classified as FGM, as female genital mutilation. It's classified as female genital modification, which is a difference. Now, again, there are a lot of Western academics and scholars who are anti labia pulling because of some of the health risks that's involved. But there are some African scholars, both men and women, who argue for it. And and the idea is that it doesn't only enhance the male partner in sexual relations, but also the woman as well. And there's a big debate in terms of whether labia pulling should be allowed, or whether the practice should be whether we put to an end. But again, there are a number of discussions about that. And rather than, again, I've got my own view, I don't agree with it. But rather than just saying this is just wrong, this is a form of FGM, I wanted to understand it. And I think that's something which a number of Orientalists and Western scholars are quite arrogant about when they go into different parts of the world. And even we as Muslims, even the West. So there might be some practices which we disagree with or we can't understand. But rather than just saying, just condemning it straight away, let me try and understand where they're coming from. And then hopefully you might be able to educate the person or speak to them where they can rationalize with them to say why maybe this practice is wrong. Because it's not only practice amongst young girls, it's also some women who are of age who practice labia pulling. But generally, unfortunately, when it comes to labia pulling, it's mainly practiced amongst girls from the age of like 8 and 9, when really and truly they haven't got a trace. That's why it's problematic. So that's why, because it's practiced on girls from a very young age, before they reach the age of puberty, a lot of people, that's why they'll classify it as a form of female genital mutilation, when you can say it's a form of female genital modification. But that being said, I'm not in favor for it, just in case anyone thinks I am. But I wanted to try and understand it before condemning something.
But just by I'm just wondering, how did scholarship deal with these types of issues when it came to modifying or mutilating female organs? I know the duplicity of the Western perspective on it. I mean, we come from a society where they stuff bags in women's breasts just so that they can be more aesthetically pleasing, and they con women into thinking, yeah, you're doing it for yourself. So I know the duplicity, and I know that even, like, you know, cosmetic surgeons will perform clitorectomies in Western society as well. So I'm fully aware of the duplicity. My question was really geared towards from your observations, how did Islamic Muslim scholarship address issues when it came to modifying or mutilating female genital organs, especially young female genital organs, which is a whole nother topic.
I would say it's only recently, like modern scholarship have kind of really addressed this issue. But traditionally, a lot of the Muslim scholars was either, is it halal, like is it wajib, is it a sunnah, or is it halal, is it permissible? That's only how generally how they were looking at it. Whether
someone's going to get cut, but what is the
is it something, because we know it's a practice that was practiced in parts of parts of North Africa and East Africa, and parts of the Arabian Peninsula, but there's some parts of the Muslim world where it wasn't practiced at all. So it wasn't even brought up as a discussion. But where it was practiced in parts of the Muslim world, like in Egypt, where I studied, because it was a cultural practice and because of attitudes towards female sexuality, was one in which we need to preserve our women, because if we let them run loose, they're going to start fornicating with everyone. That's why, unfortunately, you find a lot of scholars from that region of the world trying to Islamicize and trying to endorse it, because they ultimately have got issues with female sexuality, if that makes sense. So that's why I think it's problematic, because when you're listening to a scholar from a region of the world where that's socially acceptable or culturally acceptable, shall I say, you'll find that scholars from that region of the world would generally maybe kind of find arguments to try and endorse that practice. Whereas if you were to listen to maybe or read the writings of a Muslim scholar from the Indian subcontinent, because that's not generally practiced, they probably would talk about the health effects and why it's wrong. So that's why it's interesting when you read the Muslim scholars what part of the world they're from, because they are, like we mentioned earlier, products of their environment, and that you can see that in some of it manifests itself in some of the works they produce. But I think as Muslims in the West, because we might be attached, we're not really attached to any particular culture in the Muslim world, it's upon us to kind of see things for how it is and actually talk about it and say and look at not only like from the Islamic perspective, but also like the health consequences and the psychological effects of like some of these practices, because at the end of the day, it's all about controlling female sexuality. That all of these acts, whether it's labia pulling, FGM, or female circumcision, it's this idea that women have uncontrollable sexual desire, and we need to control it before they kind of, cause fitna everywhere. And that's problematic. It's that attitude that we kind of need to change more than anything else, as well as actual practice at hand.
Has Muslim scholars reinforced that stereotype about hypersexuality among women?
Yes, most definitely. Most definitely. I think I mentioned earlier, but the story of Prophet Yusuf and Al-Aziz, his wife, that story where, again, just paraphrasing the story, when the Prophet Yusuf was his brothers threw him in, I think it was a well. Then Al-Aziz from Egypt at the time found him. He took him to his house where he worked as like a servant boy, and then his wife at the time tried to seduce him, and in which the Prophet Yusuf ran away, and then he grabbed the back of his shirt, and it's narrated both in the Quran and in the Bible. So that famous story, which many people are aware of, a lot of Muslim scholars spoke about this, that this woman as this is the archetype of what women are like. She's the femme fatale. She is, women are like this, hypersexual, uncontrollable sexual desire, and that's why we need to protect all our women, because they've got this uncontrollable, insatiable lust for anyone you bring around them. This is what they're going to do, and that's problematic. But again, I just want to add that although there were some Muslim writers that said this, there were a number who spoke against this and said, no, that's not correct. So you did have this debate. Now, what the issue is that there's some Muslims, especially from the West, if you just read one book from the classic tradition or one interpretation of these type of stories from the tafsir, you think this is a reflection of all Muslim scholarship, when it's very diverse. You had, and that's what, some of the beauty of our history, of us in terms of looking at Islamic scholarship and some of the issues, is that you find a lot of problematic things in those texts, but they were unfiltered. But you also had people that were speaking out against it. So you have a lot of gems in a lot of these texts, but also you have a lot of problematic things. So I'm not going to say that majority of the scholars, they believe that women have like an uncontrollable sexual desire, because that was definitely not the case. But there were some that unfortunately did believe this, and they reinforced the stereotype, which even when I was studying in Al-Azhar in Egypt, you did find even some teachers uttering these type of things, like this is the way women are like, and you know that, you know, if you don't look after them, if you don't lock them in like a cupboard, they'll just go around and sleep with everyone. And this was taught to, like, you know, young men, and that's why they grew up with some of these views about women, which is problematic.
Will you come back after I get a chance to read Kunyaza?
Would I come back to
authors?
Yeah, most definitely. I really enjoyed it. I've benefited as well, and I mean that even by your posts on Facebook, and I definitely would like to, and I'd like to hear your perspective, because even some of the stuff that you've said in the past hour and a half, without you realize, it's giving me insights, and I'm actually thinking about things differently. So I do appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll definitely sit down and speak again.
Well, yes, it's been a long time, and it just goes to show you that there's so much that needs to be addressed when it comes to this. So Jazakallah for taking the time out. And again, I really highly recommend this book. I think that it should be everywhere, and there should be classes on it. And so maybe if like Muslim scholarship doesn't want to do it, maybe there's a professor somewhere at a liberal arts college, because they're usually the ones that pick up stuff like this, who's ready to like kind of like address teaching a course on this, because this is really, really fascinating. Thank you so much, Brother Habeeb, for giving me your perspective and writing such an excellent book that opens so many doors in the way one may think about the ties between faith and sensuality. So everyone pick up this book, and Jazakallah for joining me for NbA Muslim Authors Speak. Assalamu alaikum.